So continuing to talk about perimenopause and the changes in hormones. The levels can change on a daily basis. It is both the unpredictable hormonal fluctuations and a decline in estrogen that causes a range of physical and psychological symptoms. Perimenopause may not have any recognizable markers. You may still be ovulating, and you may still get your period, and you don't make the same amount of hormones as you did in the previous 20 years, but you could still be bleeding. During perimenopause, a woman will sporadically miss her period, and her cycle may be lighter or heavier or even continuous. Eventually, she will miss her period for 12 months in a row, and this is considered menopause. Now, some people will use period trackers, they'll use an app, and you could try that. But again, there can be big fluctuations in the hormones during perimenopause. So sometimes keeping track of your periods won't be a big help to determine whether you are in full-blown perimenopause. So again, the greatest predictor of early perimenopause, so when it starts, is a change of 7 days in your cycle, either earlier or later than whatever your average cycle is. So the length of your cycle is day 1 of your period to the next day 1 of your period. If that change of 7 days approximately, if that change is 7 days approximately and occurs for 10 cycles, then you are considered early perimenopause. There are no endocrine markers for this. There is no formal value you can decipher from a blood test. This is because each month the hormones are changing. So, for example, your follicle-stimulating hormone, your FSH, may be high, and that's a marker. Yet the next month it may be normal. So, as I mentioned earlier, doctors usually won't have you do lab work for that reason. Now, late-stage perimenopause. Late-stage perimenopause is if you have a change of your period more than 60 days, meaning you haven't had a period for 60 days, and it happens even one time in a year. So I just finished working with a woman who hadn't had her period for 4 months, and then she got her period. So during late-stage perimenopause, within a year to maybe 3 years, it means you will be entering menopause. That's if you haven't lost your period due to other reasons like massive weight loss or surgical menopause. If they test the FSH, it would be above 25 IU per liter, and that means the body is struggling to make the estrogen. So when symptoms start occurring, it's because of the gap between progesterone and estrogen. As the hormones begin to drop, progesterone is generally dropping faster than estrogen. Okay, how about symptoms of perimenopause? Well, a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Sapna, here in Toronto, I love what she said. She said, you name it, and it could be a symptom. I'm going to go through the list. Hang on. Heavier or lighter menstrual cycle. Timing of cycle can change. Dips of energy. Difficult concentrating, i.e. word recall. Say goodbye to your nouns, I've noticed. Mood changes and swings. PMS symptoms can worsen. Feeling raging, feeling sad, anxious, depressed. All of these are PMS symptoms and they can worsen. Sleep disruption. Oh, trust me. Feelings of heat, hot flushes. Can be an innate feeling of heat and then cold. Joint and muscle aches. And you must rule out arthritis. If it's ruled out, then you can dismiss it. So just make sure about that. More frequent urination. And this is because of the estrogen decline and the musculature of your bladder starts weakening, inability to completely void because of the softening of the muscles here, which just doesn't seem fair. This can lead to an increase in UTIs, vaginal dryness and sensitivity, pain because of that during sexual activity. Libido is low, could be because the area is dry and more sensitive. Metabolic changes. It's important to know that your numbers in your 40s, in your 40 years, when you're 40 years old and up, meaning your cholesterol, blood sugar, HbA1c, hemoglobin, get a 3-month snapshot of your blood sugar. including all of those, and thyroid. Other symptoms, numbness and tingling, hair loss, and I've seen this a lot. One of my friends, she's really losing a lot of her hair, and she had so much hair. And this can be hereditary, a large genetic component in our 40s with hair. Also, if there was a really stressful event, 3 to 4 months after, you can lose hair, so alopecia. And so this can be the same form of hair loss as postpartum. Sometimes it happens then, so same hair loss. If you had it postpartum, you could have it during perimenopause. Clumsiness, heart palpitations, and that's attributed to hormone change, and foot pain. So those are just some of the symptoms that you may experience during perimenopause and menopause later, as well as interstitial cystitis. Also, if a person has a history of anxiety or depression, or they have a tendency for high blood pressure, or if there are risk factors based on family history and genetics, for any of those things, you will have to work harder during perimenopause and menopause to keep up your health. And it means that you will be so much further ahead later on. Perimenopause can be a real roller coaster. It is helpful to investigate what we can do to set ourselves up for the next 10 to 30 years. Because remember, you have about 40 years left after menopause, 40 years left of your life because of how long we're living now as women. For example, a woman who has a history of PCOS or gestational diabetes can prepare for this. She can look at her diet and seeing a GP or naturopathic doctor. PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, is a common condition that affects your hormones. It causes irregular menstrual periods, excess hair growth, acne, pain, and infertility. And I work with a young woman who's 17 who says it's very painful, a lot of cramping. Treatment for PCOS depends on if you wish to become pregnant. Going on 2 years before and 2 years after menopause, remember menopause is 12 months without menses, there is an average weight gain of 1 pound per year. So this is very, very common. And the body may become a lot more voluptuous. So how do you help yourself keep a healthy weight? One of the most helpful things is to make sure that your protein content, this macronutrient in your diet, is high. So do an assessment of how much protein you're eating. And it's easy to do. You could use a protein chart online and plug in what you're eating, and then it will determine the grams, the amount of grams of protein that you're eating. And how much protein do you need? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. You need 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for someone that's 160 pounds, that's 68 kilograms. And that would equal 80 to 100 grams of protein per day. That's really decent. Like, you've really got to work it to make sure you're getting protein. So why would you want to make sure you're getting enough protein? So glad you asked. It helps you to feel full. It affects your energy, helps with highs and lows. For example, another naturopathic doctor in Toronto, she says she always makes sure that she has a protein-rich breakfast that is also savory. And she says then in the afternoon, she doesn't get that slump at around 2 o'clock where she used to need a nap. Also make sure that every meal and snack has a good source of protein. Because one thing about protein is you cannot store it. It is not a carbohydrate where you can store it as glucose, blood sugar, in the cells, in the muscles and the liver. Protein cannot be stored. It's used to make your tissue, okay? Nails, muscle, hair, skin. It's used. It's metabolic. Also, if you want to look at a diet style that's familiar, the Mediterranean diet is an excellent one to follow. Also, avoid saturated fats to keep your LDL cholesterol low, i.e., use dairy, low-fat dairy if you need to, olive oil, and avocados. Oh, also include udon oil. That's spelled UDON oil. And that's a combination of essential fatty acids, like the omega-6s and omega-3s in one oil. So it's a really good product to get at your health food store. And maybe it's at the main stores now in that healthy aisle. So estrogen decline affects our mood. You think? Estrogen decline affects our serotonin levels in the brain, which then changes our moods. Later, there will be a leveling off rather than daily fluctuations as we cease to release eggs and the ovaries stop producing estrogen. It can feel as though you are stuck in premenstrual syndrome. You may feel angry or tearful, tired or irritated or bloated with an endless headache. It's nasty. Alternatively, you may have long and heavy periods and feel exhausted and fearful. The symptoms of menopause are many and varied, and we'll talk about that in the next recording.